you. And Chris, you wrote an article at the National Post, Stop Comparing Palestinians to Indigenous Canadians. And I'm asking you why would you even bother?
Well, I had mentioned earlier that for the last 8 years, I find that a lot of these agendas or protests or movements that are coming out, I find a lot of the activists like to hang on to the coattails of the Indigenous movement, Indigenous reconciliation, whether it's social or economic. But what really bothered me was I came across a panel that was being hosted by a professor at UBC, and they were talking about land back, anti-colonialism, anti-settler, and they were comparing the struggles of Palestinians to Turtle Island, which is Canada. They're in reference to Indigenous struggles for sovereignty in our own lands. But the problem with that was, one, that first of all, they should have never compared us to Palestinians. Our struggles are worlds apart. I can't even fathom war being normalized between Israelis and the Palestinians because of terrorism. And I've always said that Israelis have a right to defend themselves from terrorism, and innocent Palestinians have a right to liberate themselves from terrorism.
But you also said that Jews are indigenous to the land.
Yeah.
I wonder what makes you say it out loud.
Well, before I write any article, I have to make sure my facts are there. And I work with a number of professionals, like professors from universities here in Canada, researchers, historians, that they cannot fabricate stuff. They just can't. They could get into a lot of trouble. And so before I post anything or write anything, it gets reviewed by a number of people to make sure I'm not saying anything out of context or that I don't harm anybody, including the integrity of Macdonald-Laurier Institute. But in this process, why I wrote it is because, one, I've strongly felt that we had more of a connection to Indigenous, the Israelis, the Indigenous people of Israel, than we did the Palestinians. It's not to take away that there are some similarities in our culture. One, you were a prime example of reclamation back to the land. You know, for us, for the last 160 years or so, it's the same thing. We were displaced from our own traditional lands, the cities. Like, for example, where I'm from is the Coast Saint-Jean territory of the 9 allied tribes, and our whole traditional territory was the waterfront of the Prince Rupert Harbor and all of the city of Prince Rupert. But we got moved to a place called Port Simpson, which was once called Fort Simpson, which was the first Hudson's Bay for trading post. And that was the European contact that opened up shop. And then we got displaced with the Indian Act as in the late 1800s and late 1800s and early 1900s. And they formed the residential schools, right? So we were completely left out of everything from the social fabric of who we were, our cultural, language, arts. We weren't allowed to practice any of that. And we got moved away into these small communities. And to try to compare us to war, violence, hate, and murder. Yes, residential schools happened. Yes, we were displaced from our lands. Yes, our culture, it was genocidal in the view of a lot of people. But we didn't come back with vengeance. We didn't come back with revenge and harm innocent people in the process. But the problem here that I'm finding and speaking to everybody is not so much wanting to collaborate to come to peace, is that terrorism is in the middle of that, trying to stop peace. And that the one thing I found out was not about land. This really disturbs me when it's been said to me multiple times. It was just the fact that they want to wipe out Jewish people.
And and it's just the start. It's just the beginning, because the radical Islamic like ISIS and Hamas would like to move on with their ideological efforts to wipe everybody else in the Western world and turn them to radical Islam.
Yeah, and it
we're
needs
just
to stop.
the beginning of it.
We have to, as a collective of minds, and I've been bringing this to the attention of Indigenous leaders, they need to speak out about this. This is not right. This is not standing in solidarity with Palestinians for the right to live a dignified life. This is about creating more violence, and it needs to end. It needs to stop. This cannot be brought into Canada. And I'm so tired of people comparing this whole situation with us here in Canada. Orange Shirt Day was about a bunch of kids that were taken, forcefully removed from their home. We're supposed to remember those that were taken and never made it home, and those that survived. And unfortunately, you have 7 generations of trauma that continue to linger in our communities that we're trying to get over ourselves. When I talked to my aunt who went to residential school, she is so tired of it. She's having to relive this over and over and over again. She's 85 now, and she doesn't want to continue to walk down that path. She has healed herself. Like so many of our family members have taken the steps to overcome such traumatic experiences. And then I myself, I'm a survivor of intergenerational residential school trauma. And people don't understand that. Like when your language and history and potlatches are taken away from you, you strip you of the very human being you are. You're just a shell of a human being. And so when we try to get compared to that, like Palestinians, Israelis, Jewish, you could speak your language, you could practice your culture, and you always have. And I admire that. I admire when other people of color and backgrounds could fluently speak their language. I wish
you
I
say
could.
There is no way to compare between the two, right?
No, we can't. And now what thing is that we keep getting pulled back into such a radical leftist ideology that is harming Indigenous Canadians. That is not helping us. We are supposed to build allyship with every Canadian, regardless of race. But when you have these activists out there that are clinging on to the coattails of the Indigenous movement, Indigenous reconciliation, that is setting us back. We're not here to create any violence with any race. We had never have, even though harm was inflicted on us with the INAC system, with the Indian Act. We've overcome so much. The last thing we need is borrowed trouble.
And you're not asking to wipe down Canada because this was the country that was in conflict and caused harm to the Indigenous community.
Not at all. We are making so many positive moves. We are part of the economic engine. We are part of the infrastructure. We are part of the policy development around health and education. We're seeing more and more Indigenous Canadians buying up land, buying homes, going on vacations with their families, stuff I only ever dreamed about as a child and as a kid. It's very frustrating for me when I hear people try to compare our struggles with your struggles or the Palestinian struggles. They are worlds apart. There may be some similarities, but we're not causing war and hate and anger and violence and murder to our neighbors.
Yeah.
That's terrorism. And it frustrates me that people aren't separating the two. And then to hear the chant, but again, I'm going to keep going back to it. The vile chants towards Jewish people is infuriating. This is Canada. And the fact that our governments aren't saying anything about it really angers me. And so far, the only party I'm seeing that continues to condemn these protests is the federal Conservatives. And that's a fact. I'm not just saying that. I mean, I haven't heard anything from the federal Liberals, other than in the beginning where the Prime Minister said he condemns the attacks on innocent Israelis and we stand with the Israeli people. However, why are we allowing these protests to continue to happen and then go before Jewish businesses to boycott those businesses for a war they did not cause, for a very incredibly horrific situation they did not cause, and then try to link innocent Israelis to terrorism? Like, I don't
So you think the demonstrations needs to find a different way of expressions, right?
Yes,
rather than go against.
Yeah, you can't. Okay, listen, like I'm always in the believer. If you firmly believe and feel strongly about your role, why are you hiding your face? Why are you covering up your face and screaming into a mic or carrying the flags and laughing about what happened?
Does it bring a question of who are these people who actually became Canadian and show a different face
my thing is that who are the individuals that even the Palestinians are allowing to come in and speak on their behalf, or giving them giving them the floor space? This is not about them. It's about the freedom of Palestinians have the right to liberate themselves from terrorism, and the right as a nation for Israelis to defend themselves from terrorism. And somehow in the middle of all that, people are they can't seem to disconnect the two. Yeah. Or whether they're doing this deliberately or they just don't understand. First and foremost, I could only hope for peace for everyone on both sides, for the Israelis and the Palestinians. I hope you could come to a resolve and unity and as one, because I always say that together we are stronger. You and I, and anybody that's out there that wants to solve peace and build this country together, we're stronger together. Because without Canadians, Indigenous communities cannot build proper capacity with those that have the experience to help us grow our own timber, so we could be a part of Canada and not apart from Canada.
That's pretty amazing to hear from you. Thank you very much, Chris Sankey. You are a former elected councilor of the Lax Kw Alaams Band, right? Did I say right?
Lax Kw Alaams Band.
Okay. And you're a businessman, and you're also a senior fellow of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.